Give me that. They did the same thing to my people. So that they put millions to my ass. Should a murderer go to jail for murdering? Absolutely. Should a thief go to jail when he steals? Absolutely. Should a robber pay back the money he robbed? So why shouldn't the white man pay for what he did? You'll see just how it feels. Payback is a I'm in a hell of a hole. Was never expected to grow. This obstacle stand up road. That a result of me telling my shit is what everyone knows. That the devil was known. America was never our home. Only a place of captivity, safe facility, hating, disfigure me. They claim that I'm lazy, be killing me. Maybe the slavery draining my energy. 400 years and counting. The trail of my tears is countless. The fact that I'm here is astounding, but I can't wait till this shit is surrounded. Ready to tangle my king and the angel, be ready to rap. Cracking the sky, nuclear missiles will make it official. I'm capturing every crack and surviving. Put them all in chains, where they meet the peace, slavery for me. And let the whole world see the rhythm in the cages, they put in the streets. Put the dog on a leash, get resolved for the beast. 144, get the brutal show, we get all be at peace. As soon as the trumpets are sound, your kingdom be busting it down. The only way justice is found, the time of your judgment is now. You'll see just how it feels. Payback is a dog. Payback is payback is a Look, ain't no remorse in my blood slim. It won't be no compromise. Now it's time to feed the worms. Watch his body turn to flies. I clutch iron while you trust the lies. The next Glock I back gon' be Gen 5. I get it customized. And sending shots off like farewell. Praying payback come back around like a carousel. Still remember your Honda's words ringing in my head like bells. Said you in his body, you fit a Lord, fuck the cocktail. Triangle choke, apply pressure to the game like I did Vondale. Payback's a bitch in a dress. She a bombshell, just is served cold. I just hope they make it. An oxtail, block fresh. Out the box, I swear got that new cock smell. Make myself a target in the world of mad shooters. There was design 5 for our faces, the past through it, and the day I'm jealous. I'm for a brand new pair of belts. You'll see just how it feels. Payback is a dog. Payback is a dog. Payback. This is the Israelite School of Universal and Practical Knowledge. We start out at 1 West 125th Street, Harlem, New York, under Commanding General Yohana. It's our Tuesday night brotherhood class. The oppression of Gad, the tribe of Gad. If you don't know who the tribe of Gad is, the tribe of Gad are the so-called Native American Indians. When you're in school, they teach you. Okay, so Thanksgiving is around the corner, right? When you're in school, they teach you about the Pilgrims and they teach you about the Indians. And what you learn in school is that the Pilgrims and the Indians
that they joined together hand in hand and they were happy and joyful and they ate turkey and everything was good and everything was okay, right? But the truth of the matter is the Pilgrims and the Indians did not get along with each other. The Pilgrims stole land from the Indians. The Pilgrims murdered the Indians. The Pilgrims did all kinds of atrocities to the so-called Native American Indians. And that's the truth about the Pilgrims and the Indians, man. The so-called Native American Indians, they are the tribe of Gad, according to the Bible. They are one of the lost tribes of the nation of Israel. And tonight, I'm going to show you some of the oppression and some of the things that our have to deal with and that they suffer underneath our oppressor. I think I'm going to show you. Let me get the video. It's the first thing I'm going to show you.
Apache, but really that's the government name because they can't say the guy in there.
They will tell me how awesome
indigenous. And if there is one term I do not like to be called, is American Indian.
an intimate and interconnected relationship to a homeland.
And so that's really important because land is, tied to every aspect of who we are.
Being native in a city is almost a daily reminder of your people's erasure, of the fact that people don't even remember that you're here and that you exist.
But what I didn't encounter was just this preconceived notion that all Native Americans are dead.
I've had older white men come up to
the Native Americans' land from them. And he called it America. And that's why it's called America today. But on this video, the so-called Native Americans, they're explaining to you how they feel living here in America in a land that used to belong to them, that was stole from them, where they feel like they don't even exist. People don't even know that they exist. onto that onto that piece of land and made them live there. So now they have to live there on. So now if somebody says that they're Native American, now they have to prove that they are Native American Indian. And the way they have to prove that they're Native American Indian is the government wants to
Trump's matriarchy. So what does that mean? My sisters are short 1/16 of a degree.
Another side of it, but that's a very common experience in our tribe. So it's not as if we're unusual. He doesn't want them to know that his complexion, that he doesn't, I guess he doesn't want me to be affiliated with having
Resources is one that gets lost if we don't insist upon the fact that we are a nation.
And we have taken huge steps to decolonizing, and that
Native American name, and maybe it doesn't mean anything to you, but it means everything to me. My name maybe doesn't have a romanticized Hollywood Indian name, but my name has more meaning than that. My name means that my family survived. My
about living in America, because them living in America, no one cares about how they feel. When you turn on turn on the news and you watch the news, Native Americans. Hold on. Okay, Salakia, so we back, right? So now the video that we just watched is showing you how the so-called Native Americans explaining to you how they feel about having to live in America. And that they feel like them living in America, they feel like they don't even exist in this place. Because in school, you're not being taught the truth about what really happened to the Native Americans. In school, they're going to give you some watered down, philosophy, some watered down history of what they want you to think and what they want you to believe about the so-called Native Americans. They're not going to tell you the truth. But when you actually listen to and read and study and find out the real truth about the Native Americans, you'll be shocked, man. You'll be shocked. Because the truth about the Native Americans is that they are oppressed and that they are suffering in America, and that America does not give a damn about them. America doesn't care what happens to them, how they suffer, where they're living, the condition that they're living in. America does not care. And because America does not care, the majority of our people don't care. Because our people only care about what America tells us to care about, what America teaches us to care about. And that's why the ISUPK is so important, man, because you get to learn the truth about what's going on with your people and about what's happening with your people. Now, I'm going to show you another video, right? Before I do that, now we're going to go ahead and show the video, right? Another video about the oppression of our people.
Say John T. Williams, say Charlene Miles, say Jackie. All of those things, those voices have to be said, and we have to be part of the conversation.
Abigail Echohawk is the Chief Research Officer at the Seattle Indian Health Board, one of two experts King 5 consulted with to learn about racism facing Native people. The other is Matthew Fletcher, the Foundation Professor of Law at Michigan State University. Both addressed an important topic for their community, police shootings.
Put the knife down.
What do the numbers show? How much does it affect this minority group? According to reports from the CDC, a lot.
When Native people confront the police, they are killed at a higher rate than any other demographic in the United States.
We knew before data was ever published. We had the stories that were told mouth to mouth, social media to social media, but we never saw those elevated outside of our own community.
She means for people outside their community, this seemed to be a little known fact. Nobody seemed to talk about it or even care.
Do we even matter is sometimes the question that folks are asking themselves in these larger communities where our deaths aren't acknowledged in the same way that others are.
One case that did capture attention involved a Puyallup tribal member, Jackie Sawyers, a Tacoma police officer, nearly 5 years ago, killed this mother of four who was also pregnant with her fifth child.
This is like a nightmare to me. It's like something you see in a movie.
And it felt like a piece of my heart had been ripped out.
This is Lisa Earl Rideout, Jackie's mother. She sat down with us, and so did family friend Sylvia Miller. They both have agonizing questions about that night, including how did a nearby security camera.
See, I'm gonna stop it right there, man. So that's just more proof to show you, and you'll see that there's a common theme with these videos that I'm showing. There's one thing that we continue to hear them say. They continue to talk about how they feel like they're not even, that no one even recognizes that they still exist in America. That no one even cares about the problems or the things that they suffer in America. The only time that you hear about the Native Americans is Thanksgiving. And when you hear about them, they teach you that Native Americans and Pilgrims joined together and had a Thanksgiving dinner. And that's the last thing you'll ever hear about the so-called Native Americans. And that's why the ISUPK is here. So that you can learn the truth about your brothers, the so-called Native Americans, man. So they won't feel like they're forgotten, that no one cares about them, or that no one gives a damn. Because the ISUPK gives a damn. Commanding General Yohana gives a damn, man. And that's why it's important for us to go into this type of history, man. So let me pull this scripture right here. We're going to go to Genesis chapter 49 and verse 19. Genesis 49 and 19, it says, Gad, a troop shall overcome him, but he shall overcome at the last. The so-called Native Americans, the tribe of Gad, our Gadite brothers and sisters, man, it was prophesied to them back in Genesis that they were going to be overcome, that a troop was going to overcome them. That troop that overcame them is the United States of America. But it was also prophesied that in the end, they will overcome. What you're going to learn as I continue to show you this history and play these videos about what's going on with the tribe of Gad, you're going to see that our brothers and sisters, man, they're still fighting on these reservations. They're still fighting on these reservations. The war is not over for them. It's not over with them. They're still fighting. They're still trying to overcome the oppression that they suffer at the hands of the United States of America, man. At the hands of our oppressor. Someone knocking? Yeah. Go tell your mom. So I'm gonna play this next video, right? Give me 1 second. Let me find it.
This poster shows dozens of map projections, all the weird, quirky shapes that This continent has some of the most dramatic landscapes on the planet, from the ocean shorelines to the alpine mountains and the sandy deserts. And also in this landmass, from coast to coast and everywhere in between, there lived hundreds, if not thousands, of different nations, tribes of people whose land this was. This was their home. But then others showed up to these shorelines in their boats. And that is when everything changed. In the spring of 1803, $15 million. But in this deal, which was called the State Deal, they had ever seen. With the simple stroke of a pen, their country doubled in size. All for just $15 million. But in this deal, which was called the Louisiana Purchase, the US didn't actually buy this land from France. France didn't actually own the land. What the United States was buying was the imperial rights to this huge swath of North America. This basically meant that France would stay out of the way and let the budding new empire, the United States, colonize it without interfering. If the United States really wanted ownership over this land, they would need to get it from the people who were here first, which at the time was lots of different native tribes. These are the people who had been here for thousands of years, way before Europeans had the idea of leaving their continent. And this land that the US just bought was theirs. Oh, and this isn't just me, like some modern enlightened person looking back and judging the United States at this time. The US knew that this wasn't their land and that they were going to have to buy it from the people living there. And their big plan was to do things differently, not like the old imperial powers that they had just broken away from. In fact, George Washington was, quote, determined that the US government's administration of Indian affairs shall be directed entirely by the great principles of justice and humanity. Go USA, let's do this in the right way. So instead of conquest, they would negotiate and sign formal treaties with these native nations. Then they would pay them for their land, fair and square. After all, this was a country whose founding document highlights justice, tranquility, welfare, and liberty. In our series, How the U.S. Stole, we get to see how the U.S. grew from a group of English settlers to a global superpower. But none of those stories would exist without this one, the origin story, the first thing that the U.S. ever stole. So Europeans are pouring into this newly formed country, the United States. And the government is making deals and signing treaties with the tribes allowing these newcomer immigrants to settle on their land. At first, this is a fairly peaceful transactional process. The US would offer food, farming equipment, cash, the services of a blacksmith, all in exchange for ownership over this land. But unsurprisingly, a lot of these tribes had no interest in moving out of their ancestral lands in exchange for, like, farming equipment. And this is where all of George Washington's ideals of justice and humanity really start to dissolve. The US was becoming a more powerful nation. They needed more land for their booming population. So the impatient settlers and their...
So you said all that talk about justice and humanity and we the people and all of that all that started to dissolve when they realized that the so-called Native Americans, the tribe of Gad, they weren't just gonna move away from their ancestral lands, a place that they've been living for thousands of years. You think you're just gonna be able to pay them and they're gonna leave so that you can do whatever you want to do? No, man. Come on.
Government started playing dirty.
The westward movement was like a great tidal wave.
You start to see what happens when these tribes say no to the newly powerful United States. In one instance, one group of tribes up near the Great Lakes didn't want to sell their land. They told the United States that this river would be the border and to not cross it, to stay off their land. The US said no, and they took them to war and lost twice. But on the third time, they won the battle and forced the tribes to sign a treaty giving away all of this land, basically all of present-day Ohio. Something very similar happened down here when the Seminole tribes refused to leave their land. The US military came in, another war, killing thousands, forcing the tribes to sign a treaty and pushing them into the swampy interior of the state, where they had no access to their farmland or the ocean. Down here in what was becoming Alabama, the Muskogee Nation refused to sign a relocation treaty, but not wanting to go to war, agreed to sell a portion of their land in return for a guarantee that they could keep the rest. And the United States agreed, and they actually did. And the Muskogee kept their ancestral lands forever. Womp womp, no, that didn't happen. 4 years later, a bunch of white settlers...
You see, now he's going into the treaties. And that's all the treaties that we talk about, all the treaties that America had with the so-called Native American Indians that they violated. They violated every last one of them. Hundreds of treaties that they made with the Native American Indians, and they violated every last one of them. And that's the part he's going into now, showing you how they did the same tactic, the same thing with every single tribe. Every single Gadite tribe made the same promises to every single one of them and then turned on them.
And boxing the Muskogee out of their ancestral land. As tensions grew because of this violated agreement, the US military was called in to force the Muskogee out of their lands. No treaty was ever signed. I mean, the shenanigans ranged the whole gamut here. They would get tribal leaders drunk to trick them into signing this paper that gave them all the land. They would appoint random people to be the tribal leaders and then tell them to sign away the land for the whole tribe. In another conflict, the Sioux and Arapaho nations defeated the US military over and over until the US finally signed a peace treaty acknowledging their land. And they were safe until gold was discovered 8 years later, and the US broke their treaty, redrew the boundaries, built roads on their land, and before you know it, you've got a bunch of white guys with gold pans harvesting this land. Treaties and justice be damned. Eventually, other tribes caught on to what was going to happen, realizing that refusing the US government would mean violence. So they would sign the paper, take the money, and leave. Over the course of almost 100 years, the United States signed 368 treaties with tribal nations, who were driven out one way or another to make way for white settlers, who established control over this land that their government had stolen for them. And yes, you have all the paperwork, all the spreadsheets that they were making, all the treaties, a nice paper trail, but this was all a facade of justice, a thinly veiled campaign for imperial conquest. Before we go on to the story, I just need to tell you that we don't have a sponsor for today's video. Lately, I've been hearing from some sponsors that my videos are too political. We have a Patreon on the news early, you get the, but there was side by side with the settlers for a long time. They had all signed treaties with the United States that acknowledged their right to this land. Many of them spoke English, practiced farming, wore European clothes. Some even owned slaves. Because of this, these 5 tribes, the Cherokee, Chickasaw, Choctaw, Muskogee, and Seminole, were known as the 5 civilized tribes. And there's an alternative world where these tribes could have remained.
They call them the 5 civilized tribes because they adopted the culture of our oppressors. So because they adopted some of their culture, now they're civilized.
On their land, living side by side with the Europeans as they settled. But that's not what happened, mostly because of cotton. Farmers down here were getting super rich off of a very valuable cash crop called cotton that they could sell to textile mills around the world. It was an industry made even more profitable by its key input: free labor from stolen Africans. There was this one strip of land down here called the Black Belt Prairie that was particularly desirable for farming cotton. But as you can see, it was locked up in what the United States treaties had formally acknowledged as belonging to native nations. But the farmers down here were looking at this as like, this is a perfect place to expand our cotton kingdom. So these southern slave owners did what was kind of becoming US policy towards the people living on the land that they wanted. They made up their own rules. The state of Georgia was particularly aggressive in trying to clear this land out, or in the words of their governor at the time, to replace, quote, all of the red with white population. They targeted the Cherokee Nation, passing a law that abolished their governments. The Cherokee are not going to stand for this, so they fight back using the same shenanigans that the United States is trying to use, the US legal system. They take Georgia to court, a case that went all the way to the Supreme Court. And guess what? The Cherokee Nation won. Like, there was no way around the fact that they had ironclad rights to this land, signed and sealed. The highest court in the country just ruled that the states could not impose on tribal sovereignty. But, as we all learned in government class, a ruling from the judicial branch only works if the executive branch enforces it. Oh, and who was in charge of the executive branch? Oh, this guy. The guy who wrote a letter to his wife during the War of 1812 from the battlefield saying that he had successfully slaughtered 170 Native Americans in, quote, an elegant style. Oh, and the guy who's on our $20 bill. Yeah, him. Andrew Jackson thought that negotiating treaties with the people who were living here was a ridiculous notion. So he looks at the Supreme Court ruling that validates the Cherokees' right to their land, and he literally responds in the snarkiest way possible, saying, "The Chief Justice, John Marshall, has, quote, made his decision. Now let him enforce it." No, he was not going to enforce it. Jackson had a different plan in mind. It came in the form of a new law that he pushed through both houses of Congress. His whole worldview towards First Americans embodied in a piece of American legislation, the Indian Removal Act of 1830. This law used taxpayer money to get tribes out of the United States and to relocate them to an uninhabitable place that surely no American settler will ever end up.
The Great Plains seemed an inhospitable land to people familiar with the eastern states and of Europe.
This became their dumping ground, and it came with a promise. Move here and we will never mess with you again. And what's crazy to me is that even after all of the shenanigans, all the facades, they continued to play this charade, saying that the nation of Indians may choose to exchange their land where they now reside. The law says that the government had to negotiate these treaties fairly, voluntarily, peacefully, and that the government would, quote, forever secure and guarantee them their new land, and that they wouldn't break any of the pre-existing agreements that they had made in previous treaties. But no, this was just more pretending, a paper trail of pretend humanity. Just as Andrew Jackson had ignored the Supreme Court ruling, he had no intention in following the law that he helped create. But he kept up the ruse. More documents, more signatures, more paper that made these civilized, justice-minded people feel like they weren't orchestrating a mass ethnic cleansing, sanctioned by the government, paid for by taxes, but they were. So this law is implemented, and the United States government, military, and even private companies start to ramp up their removal efforts of First Americans. They focus in on these 5 tribes that were sitting atop the land that they wanted for their cotton empire. More bribes, more pretend negotiations, and when push came to shove, more threats of violence. The Cherokee eventually signed a treaty agreeing to sell their last portion of land, and they moved west, out to their little rectangle of land that had been allocated to them by the government on maps. The only problem was that the leader who signed the treaty on behalf of the Cherokee people was not actually the real leader. They had no authority to make this decision. The Cherokee chief furiously protested this, but the US didn't care. They had their signature from someone. In their eyes, all was justified. Between 1831 and 1838, nearly every member from the 5 tribes was expelled from their land. 100,000 people, whose home this was, now forced to walk by foot for more than 1,000 miles through brutal weather and terrain towards a little box on the map, a place they had never been before. The Cherokee would eventually call this journey the Trail Where We Cried, or the Trail of Tears. Some tried to fight back against their oppressors, and others stood their ground until they were forcibly bound in chains by the US government and herded west at gunpoint. Their land was vacant, and cotton...
So that's just to show you a little bit more, man. Listen, I'm going to do a breakdown on that whole video. Because this oppressor, this devil, he explains in detail what happened to our brothers, the so-called Native Americans, and how America stole their land from them, and how he oppressed them, and how he still oppresses them to this day, man. Till this day, nothing has changed. The only thing that's different is the method of oppression. Just how I showed you earlier, how when it comes to police violence and getting murdered or killed by the police, number one is our Gadai brothers, so-called Native Americans. And you never hear about it in the news anywhere. You have to go and search for these stats and these statistics and these videos to find out what is going on with these people. Because it never comes out in the mainstream media. It's never anywhere circulating on social media. You have to go and search and find it, man. Because what America wishes and what our oppressors want is for our Gadai brothers to be forgotten about, man. For them to just be forgotten about, for people to believe and think that they don't even exist, which a lot of Americans do. A lot of Americans believe that the so-called Native Americans, that they all died off, that they're all gone. No one knows what's going on the reservations. No one knows what they're suffering. No one knows about the alcoholism. No one knows about the thousands of Native American women and little girls that go missing every month, every year. No one knows or gives a damn about it, man. But the ISUPK does. The ISUPK does. And what you have to understand is the so-called Blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans, we are the same people. We are brothers. We are sisters. We are God's chosen people. We all descend from Israel. We all share the same pain, the same struggle, the same oppression from the same oppressors. We are the same oppressors, Salakia. We all have the same enemies, man. And until we look at each other as brothers, then our suffering will continue. Until we come to the realization of what we're going through and what we're suffering is going to continue. It's not going to stop. Zephaniah 2:1 says, "Gather yourselves together, O nation that's not desired." So-called Blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans, we are the nation that's not desired, man. We are the nation that no one gives a damn about, that no one cares about. Us. We're them. I'm going to go to the scriptures, man.
Wherever too many people live squeezed in one room or...
Salakia, let me show you something. I'm going to go to Psalms 55 and 21. Salakia. What the hell? Psalms 55 and verse 21. Psalms 55 and verse 21. And it reads, the word of his mouth was smoother than butter, but war was in his heart. His word was softer than oil, yet were they drawn swords. And that's our oppressor to our Gadite brothers, man. All the treaties, all the peace treaties and the talks of peace, and how they were gonna come to agreements, and all of this BS, man, all this stuff that they said to our Gadite brothers, they turned on every single word. Not one peace treaty that they made with the so-called Native Americans did they keep. Not one. And this is our oppressor in the scriptures. His words are smoother than butter, but war was in his heart. All they cared about, all they thought about, everything that they did, it was to steal, to kill, and to destroy, man. That's our oppressor. Steal, kill, destroy. That's what he's done to the so-called Native Americans. That's what he's done to the so-called African Americans. That's what he's done to the so-called Hispanics, man. That's it. He's proven and showed us with his deeds and with his actions that there's no love in his heart for us. That war is in his heart. War is what's in his heart, man. They gave us their religion of Christianity, their religion of Catholicism. All these religions and these belief systems and philosophies that they gave us to believe in, like God loves everybody. And all these mythologies and all this stuff from, these heathenistic customs, man. And the stuff that they do, when really it's all a lie. And all they're about is war. It's to steal. It's to kill and to destroy, man. And with that, we're going to have to end it too early tonight. But on that video that I'm showing, I'm going to do a whole breakdown on that video. A whole reactions. Because that video goes into depth. And it explains a lot of the history that happened to our Gadite brothers. And the reason why they suffer the way they do. And there's more videos as well. And when you go into the history of the so-called Native Americans and you see everything that was done to them, like the boarding schools, and how about how their children were forced to be put up for adoption, and all these laws and all these programs and things that the United States of America made in order to oppress them and destroy them and to steal their culture from them, to rob them of their culture and their identity. It's a goddamn atrocity, man. It's an atrocity, and it's a shame that no one gives a damn. No one cares. Just like the brother said, they feel like they don't even exist in America, that no one cares about what they go through or what they suffer. The ISUPK cares, man. The so-called blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans, we are one people. We are one nation. Zephaniah chapter 2 verse 1 says, gather yourselves together, O nation that's not desired. We are that nation that's not desired, man. We have to come together as one. We have to see each other as brothers and sisters, man. We have to turn back to the law, statutes, and commandments that were laid down to us. That were laid down to us, man. So that our power that sits in heaven can visit this place and destroy this place and put the ones in rulership that should be in rulership, which are the so-called blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and end the class. I'm going to say shalom. Yahweh Shem Yahweh Shah Barakadah to all the brothers. Shalom Yahweh Shemah Ba'ashem Yahweh Shah to all the sisters, man.